Oh. It will not only slice and dice, but for those of you who have new car, well, never mind. That was the last taping. Be sure and wipe off that kerosene off that car's hood. I was going to, since we did not finish, and run out those people still waiting to make $1 million in 3 hours in real estate. Tell them we'll tape again next week. There's still some of the, you recall, we were playing leftovers of little things from the last few months that I never got around to. I wrote down little notes, and so I was going to press on. And you can pretend that they are or are not connected, or you can pretend, if I try and connect them, that you can pretend that you did not hear the connection. Some of you will not, of course, have to try all that hard. Oh, nobody here. I don't mean anybody here. But part of it is connected. You recall we were speaking of the fact that, particularly when you get into secondary areas, you have where you have to, that is the humans, have to engage in selling, and specifically in advertising. That things are still, relatively speaking, at such a place that even the secondary affairs that are becoming secondarily necessary, it is still the basis that they require advertising and promotion and sales pitches, or they would not be there. It would be the same as eating to stay alive, or engaging in sex simply to keep the race going. That is, it's just your hormones going, and your brain simply had nothing to say about it. Didn't even seem to notice. If it's on that basis, no advertising is required. No sales whatsoever. You all remember that. That was just a few nights ago. All right. I was going to, and perhaps this is connected. I already gave that away, didn't I? All right, perhaps this is connected. Would you care to note this? That in the affairs of man, it is not an invention itself. It is the promotion. It is the advertising. That is the ultimate triumph. That is the matter of whether something succeeds or not. It is not within, let's just lump them all in, an invention. Think about it a second. There is no such thing as the success of something new. Start off just as materialistic as you care to. An invention. The light bulb. The internal combustion engine. The external combustion engine. The steamboat. The airplane. The computer. Now, as marvelous as any of those or any ones you want to think of may apparently be, it is not the invention itself which is going to determine its ultimate success. It will not. Now, I could take some ordinary position and argue and say, well, that's just full of knock words. That if something is that important, if something is that useful, if something is that much of a breakthrough, it is going to succeed on its own. Whether someone gets out and advertises, no. You've got to get past the point of worrying about whether somebody to decide whether a Robert Fulton is now recorded as being the father, the inventor of the steamboat, when there are claims that could be made for several people of the British persuasion who had already been playing around with it, and it had some success, but they did not promote it, or they tried and they failed. They tried to get the financing to put it into production, and they were not good enough salesmen. They had a bad body odor, and none of the bankers would fool with them. We could say that, but you've got to get past the point of what seems to be the local individual humans and see that what is normally referred to as promotion, financing, advertising, marketing is all a part of the product. Maybe I can start there and you get a glimpse of it. It is a part of it. All right, if anybody gets that, now go where I started. It is that which determines, if we could separate them at all, which we can do verbally for a particular purpose, it is not the invention itself. No matter how marvelous it may seem, I assure you it's not. What determines its ultimate success, if it is going to triumph in the marketplace, that over here Fulton is recognized. Edison is recognized. The Wright brothers. If they're recognized as opposed to other claimants, it is on the basis, in the widest possible sense, of marketing, promotion, advertising, not the product. All right, now forget about airplanes and automobiles and steamboats. I know how difficult it is, but try. Okay. Think about things such as corporate mythology, oftentimes known on this planet as religion. Think of all forms of belief systems. Religion should be the most obvious one, still to most people's nervous system. It's not the only one, but it's probably the easiest to see. You could look at the social sciences, the Freudian idea of psychology in the Western world. Is it the idea? Now, ordinary intelligence would tell you it is. Ordinary genetic molecular structures in people that, let us say, are still tied to the idea of Christianity, for instance. They would say that all of this is somewhere between blasphemy and ignorance, lack of understanding of theology, that they did not have to sell this demigod of Jesus. There could have been Buddha, Moses, Muhammad, that was not necessary. It was such a startling reality that it spoke for itself. There was no need for promotion. Folks. On a level that the ordinary intelligence is not even prepared to deal with, if it could look in a certain way that you should be able to see quite bluntly, you could look at history, just ordinary three-dimensional history, and see that that argument does not really hold. Well, if it's a 10-gallon argument, it doesn't hold a full 10 gallons. Because they could still say, well, now, all right, some of the people went around and advertised. This other guy that came along, St. Paul, or the rest of them, they began to beat the drum, and then, of course, some of the popes and other people decided to jump on the bandwagon once they saw the way things were going and the pagan religions were kind of dying out around Rome. So everybody kind of jumped on the bandwagon. But it would have gone anyway. Now, ordinary intelligence can always say that because it is always, as it must, dividing up what seems to be reality into sequential events so that it can deal with it. It's the way it is. And so it could say, it could dismiss what I'm telling you and say it did not require promotion, although it seemed to have happened. Buddha, somebody could say, I've read some secret canards, some rumors that says that Buddha, right before he died, he said, look guys, whatever you do, have a good wake, but don't go out and try to turn this into religion. Just let the truth, whatever I've told you that was worthwhile, let it speak for itself. And they all went, sure, well, we will. And he died, and what's the first thing they did? They figured, hey, we got to make a living now. And there's a lot of people already hanging around thinking this was, pretty interesting. Hey, all right, I'll write a book about him. You get the T-shirt concession. They start all that. And so ordinary intelligence could make this kind of argument that, all right, it did happen, but the cogency, the expansion of these ideas would have happened without it. Well, I can be as crude as they can. Prove it. Of course you can't. But that, taking a negative approach doesn't prove what I'm saying. The proof of what I'm saying is that it happened. Well, yeah, it happened, but it didn't have to. Yeah, but it did. Well, at any rate, you see where that kind of thing can go. I'm just still trying to hint at you without being sarcastic. It is and there's a lot more behind this because we're talking about energy. I'm just putting the ordinary words to it. But promotion, marketing, is all a matter of energy being in the right time at the right place, but it cannot just be there. Now, if we're talking about the world below, outside of humans, it would be another matter because there'd be nothing to say about it anyway. But when you're talking about humans, you cannot divorce the promotion, the advertising, the sales pitch of the invention. Are we having problems? Something wrong? Would you care to consider this vis-a-vis the nervous system talking to itself? What ordinary psychology, what ordinary common sense at least in the West, would lead you to think about a man's self-image. Whether you consider yourself to be decent, whether you consider yourself to be intelligent, whether you consider that you are a pitiful creature, whether you are guilt-ridden. Nobody consider that? Well, the facts speak for themselves. I am no good. Yeah, but... All right. You say you're no good, but you cannot be no good, assuming that you are. Let's assume that's possible. You cannot be no good without marketing research, without promotion, without advertising, without a sales pitch. You cannot be no good without it being pitched to you. Now, wait a minute. And don't worry about, well, that's true, because my mother always said, you're no good, you're no good. No. You people got to be better than that. That doesn't matter. That's rain. Some people may stay outside and drown in the rain. And some people go inside. But rain is not the point. So your mother said you're no good. So what? Somebody over here, their mother said, boy, you're great. And they're worse off than you are. It's not that. It's not what your mother or any peer or any outside force told you. Not the way to... All you got to do is just get a little better than three-dimensional insight and view. It's what apparently you had to tell you. Now, I know that this is not the way ordinary psychology diagrams the nature of man, but it's a fact. It's closer to being a fact than it is that the sales pitch of whether you're no good, you're talented, whether you're decent, whether you've got a questionable future, insofar as that sales pitch coming externally. No. Closer to seeing something in a more expansive manner is that each person's nervous system has to give its own sales pitch. Even it seems to be a negative sales pitch. That is, you're no good. Someone else saying you're no good, the energy behind it will not work. That will not get the job done. You have to say yourself. And I don't mean this in some lengthy so-called psychological way. All it takes is the energy to hit you one time, if you're the right kind of person, if that was what you were destined and primed up to be. Back to where I started this subparagraph of the rhetorical, can you see any significance between whatever happens to a person is not the importance, the success, that is, the impact it seems to have on you, is not within what happened itself. That is, if this is getting too complicated, hey, let's keep going. Let us assume that the most important thing to you psychically, away from the somatic aspect of human life, into the soul, the spirit, and the intellect, let's assume that the most important thing to you personally is the steamboat. It's not the steamboat, though, because let's assume that you do not even have a steamboat. You don't have room for one if somebody gave it to you. If they did, you couldn't afford to feed it. But let us say that the steamboat is the most important thing. You think this is funny? You just think it's some kind of, I just pulled that one out since I already used it? This is parenthetical. If you think that's funny, then think about people that are religious, that the most important thing to them is God. Yeah, they ain't the same as a steamboat. Yeah. It'd take even more to feed that one than it would a steamboat. But let's assume that the steamboat is the most important thing to you psychologically, intellectually, spiritually. Do you have a steamboat? No. Have you ever even seen a steamboat in person? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's not even important that you ever have. So how can it be the most important thing to you? Promotion, marketing, sales. It's not the steamboat. Well, here we are, early 1990, for those that might get this on tape, supposedly one of the most critically acclaimed advertising gambits for the last few months has been, if you have noticed, was Honda and the new line of Infinity. In print media, on television, went on and on. They spent millions and millions and hundreds of millions and never showed the car. Of course, the real side is, never mind. Does anybody get anything from that? The most important thing to you could be a steamboat, and you may have never seen one. And I repeat, some of you got it, but if you think, well, that's kind of silly, I don't know why you brought that up. God's. being a terrible person. Have you ever seen being a terrible person? Well, no, there's no such thing as just being a terrible person. Well, sure, verbs or something. Nouns put in a pseudo-verbal sense. But there is such a thing as being a bad person, being a terrible person. Because if you feel like you are, there's got to be such a thing, right? You know, okay. Well, have you ever actually seen one? Now, forget you for a minute, because you had to have something to compare it to. You had to be able to judge that you are a terrible person. So, have you ever seen being a terrible person? Well, no. Well, I mean, have you ever seen a picture of being a terrible person? And don't give me examples, because you can say, well, I never saw a steamboat, but I've seen smoke coming out of smokestacks, and I've been told that that comes out of something not really smoke, but kind of ersatz smoke that comes out of a steam engine. Not examples. Have you ever seen a steamboat? No. Have you ever seen being a terrible person? No. So what happened? The ultimate success is not based upon the invention, the product, the service. Its success, its ability to triumph in the marketplace, in your marketplace, in this case, to use my example, is I'm a terrible person. For that to triumph over the other possibilities, like I'm a half-terrible person, or I'm a wonderful person that's terrible in his spare time. Over all the other possibilities, it can only triumph, not in some way of its own intrinsic worth. It is going to be marketing, advertising, promotion that will determine its ultimate success or lack thereof. Do you see any pertinence to that in my descriptions of the primary world? Do you see any pertinence to that in your struggle with trying to do this kind of stuff? Well, let's don't go into that. Well, that's easy to say. Why? Because we can't go into that on this basis. Very good. Who's he talking to? Let's try a little time. A couple of things I never got around to tying together. It has to do with time and talk. Can you see, can you even, I want to say in quotation marks at least, feel? Because it is within the life flow of life circulatory system through man to where you can feel it, which does not belie that you can think it, but you can feel the chemistry of this, and that is without talk, without thought/talk, you could have no sensation of time. You could have no sensation specifically of what seems to be the divisions of time. There would be absolutely no ability to think of, to feel a now or a later. You would have to be able to talk about it if you could even push back within your own nervous system to prehistoric times, pre-verbal times for man. Such creatures, and there's a piece of it still in your nervous system, but such creatures would have absolutely no sensation of time. It would not be possible. And of course, for me to even try to describe it verbally as a shot in the moot, all right, in the dark. I don't want anybody to think that we're being less than charitable to moots, because it is not open season on moots, but that's about what it would be a shot to be. But I was about to say, without the ability to talk, and therefore no sense of time, if indeed suddenly I could jump back into your ancestral DNA and grab those pre-verbal creatures that have no sense of time and shook them, and in some way could make them right quick know what we meant by time, and then go, yeah, I don't have any. Well, what's the closest you do have? They would have to say then, I don't know, it's kind of like an uncircumcised, an uncut. It's kind of like an uncut feeling of just. Could you be more specific? Is. And that's about it. If you'd like for me to remind some of you, or maybe many of you, I dare say, without you knowing at the time, there's no pertinence, but many of you have had, I'm sure, little glances of this sensation back when you took certain drugs, that time almost ceased to be. I know enough that people have throughout the ages, every now and then, people have mentioned to one another. Somebody try and go, wow. And just every now and then, in those conditions, ordinary people are wont to say, it's almost as though life and time have kind of melted or stretched out, or I lost all sense of time. Of course, when you're on drugs, to say I lost all sense of time, it's not just saying I lost all sense of time. I got involved watching TV or something and didn't, stayed longer at a place than I should have. It's that sensation of, Jesus, I was still conscious and I was here, and it was like time just went away. And without it going away, you're never aware that time seems to be running through you. Those creatures, I said, if I could slap them right quick and play with justice, which you couldn't, and point out to them that we have a thing called time, they go, yeah, gotcha, and you don't. They say, yeah, you're right. And I said, well, how would you describe, what's the closest? And they'd have to go, because there would be no sensation of time unless you could talk about it. There would be no sensation of yesterday, of the past, unless you can talk about yesterday's kill. There is no possible sensation of a future unless they could sit there and plan tomorrow's hunt. It's not possible. Could you take this a little further, if you even took it this far? If you could not talk about time, there could be no shortage of it. If there were not names, if humans had not named hours, days, months, you could never have the sensation of being behind, of being pressured, of being stressed. You've got to have names, literally. You have got to have, I say literally, of course, it's why I say sometimes thought/talk, because it is already in the human nervous system, but to put it at a verbal basis, there would be no way to express, be no way to experience that I'm behind. I've got to do something. I'm getting late. Unless you had names for it. Unless you could actually say, well, I'm late. Not just a watch, but you actually feel I'm late. I'm getting behind. Is that too simple or too complex? Because then I was going to say, that doesn't make any of you want to consider all of that in other areas. How could you be stressed in other areas? I didn't stay there long enough to do the setup. Why should I give you the punchline? It would literally be impossible. I'm not saying that there is not some reality and some energy behind what humans call time. But the thing of time now that you're never free from, not the ordinary nervous system, in case you think you are, people are not free from time. Let's say Saturdays. You never work on Saturdays. You're not free from time. Are you? I can sleep as late as I want to on Saturday. No, you can't. I can stay up as late as I want to on Saturday. No, you can't. Not the ordinary nervous system. It is still on somebody's clock. It's on last clock. If it's on last clock down to a level that looked at from a certain way, it's still on somebody's ordinary, worldly clock. Well, I can't stay up too late on Saturday or even Sunday because I got to go work on Monday. And sometimes you may not even think specifically why you're still being stressed by time, but it's just, Jesus, it's 5 o'clock. We've got running around. We're to get home. We got to feed the kids. You got to call your mother later. I got to get up Sunday and I got to work on the roof. It would seem, if any of you are following this, which evidently I'm back alone in the polo grounds, that ordinary people would say that there is a kind of stress to life. But then many people would say, life would make them say that there is a stress that is tied directly on a shortage of time. So much to do in life, so little time. If there were not names, if you could not talk, if man did not talk about time, you couldn't be stressed by time. Well, even I believe in 3 strikes you're out. Well, maybe 4 or 5, but even I have my limit. I'll go ahead and give you the punchline then, as I'd already given away. If any of you see that it's just a fact. then consider all the other areas that stress man out. And if you told ordinary people some of the great stresses of life, the stresses that apparently are inescapable, and they go, yeah, I know what they are. You wouldn't have them if you didn't have a name for them. Ha! Talk about childish. This is beyond pop or below pop psychology. This is kindergarten psychology. It's real stresses, the same way as real problems in life are real. Names are just some sort of signpost. There's some kind of dispensable way to make reference to them. Well, meet me over in the polo grounds maybe Wednesday, and I'll listen to your debate. Well, let's go from time to, time. How about in the ordinary sense, which I won't argue for the time being, but it's accepted by sophisticated intellectual people that time is space's fourth dimension. All right. Time has got its own three dimensions now. Past, present, and future. So if that be true, which I'm not questioning, that time is space's fourth dimension, then that means that time, you might think, would have its own fourth dimension. That when you talk about space, and you have described everything that the human intellect can comprehend once you have described the height, the width, and the depth of something. That is it. After that, you have got to start playing intellectual, if not externally, physically speaking, graph paper, and to locate, to describe the existence of something to any other degree. The next stage, as far as the human intellect can even think about, other than mathematical models, but they're still tied to time, that once you've got those three spaces, those three dimensions in space, the fourth one is time. All right, let's just take that. All of you heard that back in high school. But now let's move it to the area of time. Time has its own three dimensions. They're just not called that, but they have their own three dimensions. If you're going to talk about time and fully, intellectually cover its attributes the same way as space, you just can't say space. You can say, well, something exists in space. Well, you can say that, but you have not covered all possible descriptions. You have not covered all possible intellectual diagrams, lemmings of what it is. To do so, you have got to locate it in space, using the three dimensions, covering all three of them. To say, well, I'll tell you exactly where I live. I live at the corner of 4th and Elm Street, on the second story of that house. Now, anything less than that, if you just say, well, I live over here, I live in space. I live here in the city. That's right, but if you're going to cover it in all possible ways, you have got to say, I live at the corner of 4th and Elm, I live on the second floor, and if you're going to be as specific as possible on this planet, whether you be an Einstein or whether you be a second cousin who's out of work, then you would say, and I live there year in and year out, and I am normally home during the week after 5:30 on Saturday and Sundays most of the day. Now you have covered everything possible, but if you move now from space into time, and if you're going to talk about time, to be as specific as possible, you have got to locate, you have got to cover the past, the present, and the future. People do not think about it this way, but when you're trying to locate, when you're trying to describe the age of something, you're doing that. When you're talking about, well, I got a brand new car, or it's about time to trade in my car. If you even say, God, my back, you heard it? No, I don't know. It's just seems to be a gradual process. All of this, you are without knowing it, but you are, the more complete you try to describe what's going on, you are using all three dimensions of time. But now it would only stand to reason. You people who do not like to go to the polo grounds, I know you're real in favor of reason and logic. And of course I'm hinting that it's not just ordinary conceptions that might follow this. But if space is time's fourth dimension, then time has got to have a fourth dimension. After you run through the past, the present, and the future. Now, in other words, time has got to go around the corner also. That time is space going around the corner. Time is space being covered in all the spatial dimensions, and then you got to go around the corner in what amounts to another direction, because time is not, and there is no way to point at time, but it's just that it's somewhere else, and so they call it the fourth dimension, but you can't point to it, and so they give it another name. They call it time. Time you can divide up into three, and to give you a spatial description besides verbally, you can picture this line that over here behind you, behind whatever you think is you in time, 5 minutes ago, 2 seconds ago was the past, and then in some way this is a nebulous present, and then what is yet to be, the hours coming up, the minutes coming up. So you can describe those three, and everyone accepts it. But it's got to have a fourth one, and it's got to turn the corner. That is, it's no longer going to be time any more than time is a fourth dimension of space. It's another dimension, but you can't point to it. There are three dimensions of time that people talk about, and there's no question that everyone understands the past, present, and future. To turn the corner, the fourth dimension of time has got to be somewhere that you cannot point to. It has got to be somewhere that you cannot say. What might that be? Or for those of you that inherited a subscription to Omni or some intellectually challenging magazine, let me ask you this. Those of you that followed this, why aren't people working on this? Why do we not have laboratories and grants going on and the government behind this to find out what the fourth dimension, so to speak, of time is? I want to know. Not enough to hear from any of you people that think you know. Of course, I can give you a little secret. They don't call it that, but what do they call it? Religion. They don't know it, but they've been playing around. That's one of the institutionalized purposes behind the myths of religion. Not near specific enough to ever give any sort of meaningful response to my question as to what would be the fourth dimension of time. But all the things that seem to be transcendental, as they used to like to call it, or metaphysical, something that goes beyond the veil of what we can think about with our five senses. I like to bring that up every now and then for some of you to get a laugh. Because everyone accepts, well, almost everyone on this planet accepts that there are things that can only be known, if they'll ever be known, outside the five senses. Like it's a fait accompli that there is something outside the five senses. It's just a matter of perhaps correctly identifying it, getting it tightened up, or getting it in the correct gear. But no, everyone questions like, what five? What are beyond the five senses? Can you give yourself some example? Well, we've been through this before. I guess most ordinary people historically have said things like, well, the God's speaking to us. All right, how'd you know he spoke to you? Well, I heard him. Oh, no, now wait a minute. I don't mean I heard him like it was, my wife in the kitchen hollering, turn off the stove. No, it was I heard it, I don't know, I heard it in my soul. All right, you heard it. Yeah, in my soul. Is that anywhere close to, shall we say, your head? But at any rate, please at least note that insofar as time being space's fourth dimension, then time has got to have its own fourth dimension. But notice that no one is directly working on it because no one's ever even noticed. As far as I know, life has never made anybody say this yet. If they have, it didn't amount to anything. It was just life fooling around like it does sometimes. But you notice there is no widespread ideas, no theories, no debate, no conversation, no articles, even in Omni, about where is life, where is time's fourth dimension. The subject has yet to arise on a serious basis. But should it not be? Or, back to the one you people like, such things as this that can even be described in what would appear to be, I hope you'll agree, a logical manner verbally, even if you don't know what to do with it. It makes sense. You can't say that this is absolutely from Pluto or Jupiter or Orion, that this makes sense even at this level. But then you ought to think, hey, if that's true, and time, as it turns out, is space, it's this fourth dimension, so to speak, there is validity to that description. It's about the only useful verbal description that the intellect can make of it. If that's true, then time has got to have its own fourth dimension. And now I think about it, nobody else has ever thought about it. It's got to be true if the first part's true. And nobody's worried about it. What if that is some kind of unrecognized, I was going to say black hole, but then you've got to understand a black hole could be turned inside out. Or back to the way some of you like it. Wouldn't that explain a lot? That we got the dimensions of space in the same way we got our five senses, no matter how people talk about something else. Talk about it if you want to. Imagine it if you want to. I can imagine other things. Well, what did you use to imagine these other things? Yeah, I know. Imagine right now in time, not space, not some kind of spooky rod swirling and lights flashing like the Twilight Zone intro, but there's something going on here that time has its own fourth dimension and that human intellect simply has not discovered it. And it's got to be there. I don't mean way off somewhere else. It's got to be right here. If time is space's fourth dimension, and nobody questions that, and if time exists, of course, nobody questions that, and time has three dimensions, it's just not normally called that, but it's got three dimensions. That's the only way to fully describe time. In the same way, the only way to fully pinpoint something in space, you've got to use all three dimensions. To fully, to the utmost, to describe something temporally existing, you have got to take into consideration. You don't have to do it by thinking about it any more than you think about it every time you describe something in space. That, wait a minute, have I given them the width, the breadth, the longitude, the latitude, the height, the altitude? Have I done all that? No. You'll say, hey, would you bring my car? Where is it? It's around the corner of the building. But you have located it in three-dimensional space. And you have also located it in time because you're telling the person it's there right now. That is the full extent without you thinking about it. And for people to describe something at the fullest, whether they think about it to this degree or not, in time they are taking into consideration the three dimensions of the past, present, and future. But if time is space's fourth dimension, then time has got to have a fourth dimension, and nobody ever thought about it. They think about all kinds of stuff like, well, there's things going on we don't know about. Yeah, but we'll think about them later. Oh, okay. We'll think about them tomorrow. We'll think about them tomorrow when I'm back at the laboratory. Ah. Well, they got time and space down, other than the fact that time's got to have another dimension. Well, I told you I'd think about it tomorrow. What the hell you want from me? I can't think about it now. It's my off day, for one thing. And I do my best thinking back at the lab. They have got time and space covered. Since we're talking about space, I'll finally dig this one up. I'm going to quote astronomers. This seems to be one of their little pet things. Astronomers say that if you don't write it down, that is, log it in, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Does everybody follow that? You could pull that in other sciences, but especially them because it's so ephemeral at times. The more complex it is, I pointed out, especially in secondary affairs, the more difficult, the stickier it is to get a reputation. You have now guys standing in line and freezing their acorns off to get to some telescope just for a few hours, and then they get a glimpse of something, and they look down and they can't find it charted anywhere, and so they decide to name it after themselves, that it's a brand new nova, an ersatz nova, I don't know what something, they don't know what it is. The furthest galaxy. Astronomy, I assume you followed about me trying to give a lecture in astronomy, which I'm not qualified to do. The whole thing is they must continually, spatially, that is, in the logbook, and time-wise, specifically, when they saw it. But they say literally that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. But I assume enough of you laughed. And as I said, you could take it into other sciences, but it is in astronomy. Till you run the next morning, when some of the guys on the next shift show up there at the observatory, and you holler, "Last night I saw the damnedest thing." What was it? Well, I was looking out over toward 4th and Elm. I was looking up, up high like I do with a telescope, like you guys do. And I saw this thing with flash, and they go and look at the logbook, and they try to look for the coordinates of where he was and what time it was. Maybe all he did was right there, he put "wow" on one page. Well, suffice it to say, I assume all of you followed, in the secondary world of the science, but in all the secondary worlds, but to stick with this example, there is a way in which it's tied in as part of the event itself, that if it were not noted in some way that can be recalled in time and space by other intellects, and you could say, well, man could cheat, he could just make it up and write it down. None of you would say that. You've got to be more complex than that by now. It's not the way your life works. But that the event, for all intents and purposes, inside the secondary world of astronomy, that you say it happened, you say you saw it, but if it were not properly written down, if it was not properly written down, whatever the form is at that observatory, or whatever astronomy uses in general now, in a specific way, but it would have to do, obviously, with time and space. You would have to put when, and to be able to identify what part of the skies you were looking, in which you were looking. But if it was not there, for all intents and purposes, you're not playing the game. You quit dancing in that secondary game of astronomy. And even if you're some of your colleagues there that you grew up with, and you say, I saw it, I just forgot to write it down. They go, well, I don't think that Hubert lied to us. But for all intents and purposes, whatever it was he saw, at least for today, for tonight, for him to try and say, wait a minute, I have seen the damnedest thing, my reputation is made. No. Maybe he'll see it again tomorrow night. Maybe this is not the end of it. But insofar as right now, he says the event happened. He says that he experienced it and he saw it. But if it was not written down, if the event was not written down, the event did not happen. Would anyone dare to consider that within the ordinary intellect's conception of reality? Vis-a-vis thought/talk. That if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. That is, it was not reality. Unless I thought about it. Those of you really good might care to consider what seems to be historically the frustration, as they put it, of many, what do they used to call them, mystics. People had visions. Would you write it down? Well, Jesus, I didn't have time. Of course, those of you getting good, it didn't have to actually write it down. Moses or his brother may not have had a pencil and a paper with him at the time. But you in some way have got to write it down. The experience, the thing, is tied to promotion, financing, market research. I think I talked to God. What, did you get down the logbook? Now, this doesn't have to be some other person. You think, God, that was a weird experience. After I had those 17 pizzas within an hour, and I kind of laid down and I thought maybe I was going to be sick. I lost sense of time. It's like I had some kind of experience. I think somebody talked to me. It might have been God. Another part of your nervous system says, did you log it in? That's when you are on the verge, perhaps, of being a mystic, because then you want to run out in the street and holler, Eureka, Eureka, I think. And people say, well, did you write it down? And you go, well, no, but let me tell you about it. Your own nervous system will not take just the experience, will not take just the invention. It has to be written down. It has to be put in some kind of marketing form. It has to be logged in. You have to think about it in a way that you will later talk about it. Does that not sound like ordinary man's conception of his own local reality? And what seems to be the forms of reality that are highly questionable, those kind of so-called mystical, extra conscious states. Why are they so questionable if they happen? It's because people do not write them down. Now don't say, I know that later, hell, they write them down. They write them down and write them down and write them down. And the books get bigger and bigger and bigger. Anybody who ever wants to, if you never thought about it, go over and look in the book section in the library of mystical and flim-flam, occult and all that. If you need any guideposts, the bigger the book is, the further away from the event the writer tried to later log it in. And sometimes they're the first ones to admit it. They don't know why, but they say, my experience was so extraordinary. Now I notice some of you, I'm reading the introduction to the guy's book. Some of you probably wonder why this book is 23,000 pages long. But it is because the event, the experience I had is so extraordinary, simply 17,000 pages, like my last book, wouldn't get it. But what they're saying, without knowing it, is they waited, either in time or space, even further from the event, assuming it happened, which I'll accept their word, but they didn't write it down at the time. It'd be kind of like the astronomer. He says, I saw this thing. And besides maybe a friend or two that comes in the next morning and they think, well, why would Hubert lie? The establishment of astronomy, they come in the next day and they say, well, the logbook is empty there for about a 2-hour period. We just cannot accept it. We're not calling you a liar, but you know. Do we have to repeat this? And Hubert goes, I know. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Jesus. So he says, all right, I'll write it down. Well, of course, Hubert, it's a little late now. Yeah, but still, I'll write it down. It'll be like Hubert's theory of what I saw. Or, the further he is removed from it, that is, the further life is arranged in such a way as the establishment, the secondary establishment, in this case of astronomy, goes, well, you didn't actually play the game right. Then the more vociferous he has got to proclaim, I saw it. Do you follow? That is, the bigger the book's going to be. Because if you write it down at the time, that is, if the experience happened and you were such that you knew what the experience was, you would log it in. You'd go, And then you wouldn't take 23,000 pages to write your book. You wouldn't write a damn book. Well, some of you did. You'd just write a book and say, it happened. And that'd be it. I got 10 minutes. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to try all the odds and ends. Does anybody remember several weeks back in our tapings, and I mentioned mathematics again, and we even covered that ordinary intelligence, in a sense, is mathematical, but in the sense that almost everything that humans say to one another could be looked at as being an equation, but not of producing new information, but on the basis of the equations themselves, looked at from one view, are presenting no new information. They're simply comparisons. And they're comparisons of a known with a comparison for a new name for the known. And it seems to be something new, but in a sense it's not new. All right? Everybody's up to date. Now I had a question for you. I didn't give it to you at that time. Now pretend everybody followed it up to here. It's only been several weeks. Then the question was, is the new, quote, and the different the same thing? If not, what's their connection? I'd like a written report by Thursday. I had another one. Less scientific, I guess. I hear people, and I've even heard people around here, and sometimes I receive cards and letters from those people out there in TV land. Plus, I've told you before, don't send cards because you can't put any money in cards. That's a little old-time radio religious humor. There used to be a minister back in the 50s down in Del Rio, Texas. At the end of his program, after he attempted to save pieces of the original cross, and Jesus' sweat and anything else you wanted. He'd say, of course, you don't have to buy anything, but you just send me your prayer request, or tell me how life's going, and tell me what you think of me and how much you've loved me. Send in those cards and letters, and he'd say, no, don't send none of them cards. He said, you can't put nothing in a card. Except he didn't say it as a joke. So. Of course, I'm not sure that his listening audience would have understood the joke anyway. He just said, do not send cards, I want letters. And sometimes he'd say, I want fat letters. I want letters that have something in them. At any rate, where were we? There are people that say, now I've heard this term, and I've heard that in life, but people that say that their life is falling apart. Now, to say that your life is falling apart, to say that, you're saying it as though your individual existence is some kind of separate snapshot that by itself can just deteriorate like a old cheap Polaroid left out in the sun or whatever would be comparable today. Whereas human life, the existence of humanity, not just individual, but the humanity, is like a wide-angle panoramic shot of everybody standing up almost shoulder to shoulder out there washing their clothes in this infinite river. But to feel like your life is falling apart, all you've got is a sensation of you. Just you, and perhaps in a little wading pool somewhere. And down the wading pool you see shark fins or to feel like, and I know this is ordinary, and the only reason I bring it up is not because of ordinary, it's quite acceptable out there in life, but it's people fooling around with this and still sometimes expressing such ideas. But can you see from an old ordinary view what I was about to point towards, but it's closer to the fourth dimension of time. But at any rate, ordinary intelligence would say that I was about to call it extreme egoism, to believe that your life is falling apart. It's extreme dumbness. It's not possible for somebody's life to fall apart. All right, I'll put it to you another way. It's not possible for a real revolutionist's life to fall apart. There are things that in the secondary world that do not go the way in which your secondary brain, that is ordinary intelligence, thought they should go. But to say my life's falling apart, forget being a revolutionist, forget being a subversive, and I'm not questioning the impact it can have if you have a business and the business fails. But to say my life is falling apart, don't say my business fell apart. My bankroll fell apart. But to say my life fell apart, with ordinary people can be true, but if you say that, you're not a revolutionist. If your life is falling apart, you're just as ordinary, you might as well paste your picture next to ordinary in the dictionary. But if you're doing something outside the ordinary, it's not possible for a man's life to fall apart. It's just not. Well, okay. All right. Jesus. All right, I'll admit it. Everybody's life's falling apart. Are you happy? At an ordinary level, you could say that everybody's life's falling apart. And you could start off right quick. We're running out, so listen. Some of you should know this already. You could say that everybody's life is falling apart, but on the basis that everyone's going to die, which is somewhere beyond the secondary level. That is something a little more basic than your business fell apart. Okay, I'll give you that. Except for this. If that's the basis, if you could say it, that's the basis of anyone feeling my life is falling apart. If that's the basis, then I've got to point this out. That's only operational if you talk about it. You're damn right. All right. Even if it's true that the death of the human body is the basis for people. That is where it all flows from and expands itself. That's the basis of people saying my life is falling apart, where they can be specific, whether they're example or not. Even if you say that's the basis of it, and I say, okay, Which, of course, you didn't even have the wherewithal to say that. I had to say it. But if that was the basis, then I got to point this out, though. It can't be death. It's got to be the fear of death or the knowledge of death. And how can you have that? Now, you can die without the knowledge of death. Take my word for it. Just trust me. If not... But your life could not fall apart on that basis. That is, you could not have a knowledge of death without what? Without logging it in. Yes, I saw death. Whether you actually saw it, you may not have ever seen a steamboat. But you're sure there is a steamboat and you're sure there's death. I'm sure I saw that thing last night. Well, did you write? Oh, yeah, you did. You wrote it down. You're darn right I wrote it down. And I'm scared to death. My life is coming apart. Why do you say that? Well, I don't know. Sometimes I just get the blues. Maybe it's the fear of death, the knowledge of death. I just pointed out so anybody can hear. If you did not log it in, if you did not say it to yourself, if you did not talk it, even if it were the basis of everyone's feeling periodically that my life personally is falling apart. If it is, death is at the root of that kind of tree. Notice this, that's of no consequence unless you talk about it. Now, the final challenge for the night, the Pillsbury Challenge. Is that it? Yeah. Even if something as basic, as inescapable as death, if that could be the basis of people feeling as though their life is falling apart, and then I point out to you that even if that were true, that knowledge of death could not take hold unless you talked about it, would anybody care to take the final challenge for the night and apply that to anything else? Well, exactly what? Anything! Anything?